I lived in Upper Canada at the time, in a well-sized cabin-type home. The holiday season was always my favorite time of the year, as my family would gather at one of our homes and celebrate Christmas together. Living alone, this was always something to look forward to. I didn't mind being alone, but it was just nice to see some friends and family sometimes. Being in a relatively sizable home, our small family would often either gather at my place or my brother's place, usually taking turns each year. This year, it was my turn to host the family gathering. Most of my family lived on the other side of Canada, though, making it a long drive or a costly plane ride. Typically, though, everyone tried to arrive on Christmas Eve. Come December 23rd, I called up my brother to make sure everything was going as planned. He informed me that our parents might arrive early Christmas morning due to a flight delay, but he was driving and should make it by the night of Christmas Eve. Wishing him safe travels, I said goodnight and went back to bed. Now, if you've ever lived in Canada, especially further north, you know the winters are brutally cold and long. Often, snowstorms and blizzards can form suddenly and last for varied amounts of time. That being said, the next day, heavy snowfall covered the grounds in the morning and was accompanied by rushing winds in the afternoon. I received a call from my brother around 6 p.m., notifying me that he was going to have to stay at a motel for the night due to the snowstorm covering the roads. I agreed that it was the safe decision, though I was a bit upset that I'd have to spend the day before Christmas alone. But I tried to stay positive, looking forward to Christmas Day with my whole family. At 10 o'clock, I got ready for bed and set an early alarm for 5 a.m., just in case my parents arrived at the airport early. The wind howling outside the house gave me trouble falling asleep, as it was shaking the whole room and making the house creak. But as I lay there, annoyed and awake, a soft and rhythmic sound approached from outside the cabin. The wind, blowing in all directions at random speeds, made the soft 1-2 of the footsteps stand out. They were slow, as you would expect in this kind of weather, but they continued all the way until they reached the wall on the left side of my house. I just lay there with my eyes open, listening to the strange person walking during a blizzard in the middle of the night. A lot of things ran through my head, such as complete confusion and fear of a possible attack. However, I began wondering if it was my brother. Maybe something had happened and his phone didn't have service. Maybe he couldn't find a hotel. The more I had these thoughts, the more I felt I had to find a way to see who it was. In weather like this, nobody could last more than an hour without serious consequences, and I definitely didn't want my brother stuck out there. As I was putting on some heavier clothes, a knock came from downstairs. The odd thing about it was that it was a single knock, and it didn't come from the front door. Hesitantly, I opened my bedroom door and peeked down the stairs. It was far too dark to see anything, but I didn't want to give away my position if it was someone dangerous, so I left the lights off. I walked blindly down the stairs, still listening for any footsteps or sound, but heard nothing aside from the strong winds. As I got to the bottom, I made my way to the front door. While the knock didn't seem to come from the front, I didn't really know what else to do. I'm not sure why, but this was when I really started to get nervous. Afraid even. I don't usually say I scare easily, but something just felt very wrong. Approaching the door in silence, I leaned forward and moved the small blinds on the side of the window. A man stood there, looking at the door, calm and emotionless. But as soon as he noticed me, he began screaming for me to help him, banging on the window as he stared me in the eyes. I jumped back, not expecting such a sudden reaction. My heart started pounding in my chest. The man didn't look well. He looked crazy, and he had one hand in his pocket like he was hiding something. I didn't feel at all comfortable opening the door, but I also didn't want to have the man's blood on my hands for not helping him during a storm like this. "What's wrong? How did you get here?" I yelled. A few seconds passed before the man answered calmly, "I got lost. I just need somewhere to shelter." His shift in attitude was alarming. I stood there thinking for a bit before the man asked me again to let him in, then again, and again, getting more aggressive with each word before beginning to hit the door, pounding on it over and over. I ran to the other room to grab my pistol that I kept in cases of home defense. Then I went back to the front door, though I stood a good distance away and held my ground, hoping he would just leave if I ignored him. He continued banging for well over a minute, but as I stood there anxiously waiting, I heard again the crunch of footsteps walking around my house. Knowing now that this was for sure a bad situation, I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom. I heard two men start talking soon after, followed by a window shattering and footsteps entering my home. The footsteps scattered around downstairs. I heard things moving and objects clattering before someone began climbing the stairs. My bedroom was the only room upstairs aside from a half-bathroom and closet. Shaking uncontrollably and praying in my head, I held my gun up and aimed at the door as a man approached the other side. "Yeah, he's got to be in here," the man yelled almost in a cheerful way. He punched the door once, though it sounded heavy as if he had hit it with a hammer or maybe even a gun. I couldn't help but make a quiet gasp from the terror of it. The man let out a sick, chuckling laugh. Then the other man downstairs yelled something, and both of their footsteps faded away. I sat there with my gun held at the door for probably 15 minutes, with nothing but the sounds of winds blowing. Clearing the house carefully, I made sure they were gone, then put a small wooden board over the broken window to keep the snow out. The men had taken a few expensive things around the house and left a bit of a mess, but no other harm was done. The blizzard had settled by morning, and I informed my family and the police of the encounter. My brother was angry at himself for not having been there for me, but I assured him it was okay and he made the right call to not drive in a snowstorm. Despite having the most horrifying encounter in my entire life, I actually had a really enjoyable Christmas with my family. People these days are cruel and awful humans, and to do something like that, to put someone through something like that, especially during the holiday season, is just another level of insanity. It was Christmas Eve, and I remember it so clearly, how everything in Hemlock Hollow seemed to be wrapped in this soft, peaceful quiet. It should have been the perfect setting, right? But there I was, sitting alone, feeling like a stranger in this place, surrounded by all this holiday cheer that just didn't feel right anymore. I mean, after everything that had happened, it was hard to still believe in the magic of Christmas. A year had passed since my divorce. A whole year. A year since I packed up my life and left behind the house, the promises, the future I thought I was building with someone who wasn't the person I thought he was. So now here I was, living in a tiny apartment on the edge of town, surrounded by bare walls and memories of a life that felt like a lifetime ago. The holidays felt more like a reminder than anything else, reminding me of how much had been lost. That night, I sat at my little kitchen table, scrolling mindlessly through an online marketplace. The emptiness of my apartment echoed in the silence. I wasn't expecting much, definitely not a Christmas miracle, but then I saw it. Vintage sofa, free to take, must pick up before Christmas. Just like that, it caught my eye. It wasn't much, but it was something. And at that moment, I needed something. I clicked without thinking. The guy selling it, John, was quick to respond. "You can have it," he said, almost desperate. "Just take it before tomorrow, please." Something in his voice made me pause, but I pushed it aside. My apartment was practically empty, and I could definitely use a couch, no matter how old or worn it was. When I got to John's place, though, I instantly felt like something was off. The house was old, abandoned-looking, tucked away in a neighborhood I didn't even know existed. The air smelled musty, like mildew, and there was this faint sour odor I couldn't place. John himself looked like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His face pale, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. He didn't meet my gaze as he handed me the keys to his van. Barely speaking, just mumbling, "Take care of it." I didn't think much of it, though. I mean, I was just there to pick up a free couch. What else was I supposed to think? So I loaded it up and drove it back to my apartment, that strange feeling gnawing at the back of my mind, but I was in no mood to overthink things. A couch was a couch, right? And my place needed it. When I set it up, I gave it a good dusting and then plopped down in front of the window. It wasn't much to look at. Faded fabric, the edges a little worn, but it was surprisingly comfortable. But as I settled in, I noticed something strange. My fingers brushed the left armrest, and something stitched into the fabric caught my eye. Run while you can. I laughed a little nervously, telling myself it was just some weird random thing. Maybe a prank. Maybe some obscure art statement. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room felt colder, the air heavier, like I wasn't really alone in that apartment anymore. My heart started to race for no reason, and I couldn't explain it, but I felt like someone was watching me. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of creaking wood. I froze, my heart in my throat, convinced it was just a dream. But when I sat up, I saw it. The couch had moved. The armrest was closer to me than it had been when I fell asleep. The cushions were out of place too. And then I noticed something new. Another message written into the fabric. The next warning will be your last. My blood ran cold. I sat there for a long time, too terrified to move. Was this some sick joke? Was I losing my mind? I didn't know what to believe anymore. I spent hours online trying to make sense of it all, but I couldn't find anything that made sense. The next day, I couldn't shake that feeling. It wasn't just the messages. It was the way the couch felt, like it was alive in some weird, unsettling way, like it had been there forever and would be there long after I was gone. By the time evening rolled around, I was so freaked out, I didn't even want to sit near it. So I stayed in the kitchen, watching the Christmas lights flicker outside. Everyone else seemed so happy, so full of cheer, but all I could feel was this weight closing in on me. Then, around midnight, I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like something moving. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed into the living room, my breath catching in my throat. The couch had moved again, a few inches closer to the door. I could barely breathe. I went to check the cushions, and I saw it. Another scrap of fabric stuffed inside the zipper of one of them. It read, "You've been warned." That was it. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to get rid of it. I dragged the couch into the hallway, ignoring the confused looks from my neighbors, and shoved it outside. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it would all be over. But then I heard footsteps. Mr. Gable, the building super, was coming down the stairs. "You can't leave this here," he grumbled, glaring at me. "You'll have to take it to the junkyard." I tried to explain, but he wasn't having it. He was already heading out the door, muttering under his breath. I just wanted to be done with it, so I loaded the couch back into my truck, fighting the urge to cry. The junkyard was only a few miles away. Maybe once it was gone, I could get some sleep. But as I drove, something felt wrong. My hands were shaking, and that feeling of being watched crept back. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. My blood ran cold. The couch, it wasn't empty. A figure was sitting on it, its face twisted, hollow eyes staring back at me from the rearview mirror. The air in the truck grew frigid, the windows fogging with cold. Couldn't scream. I just kept driving, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. But all I could do was drive faster, straight for the junkyard. When I got there, I rushed to open the truck's tailgate. But when I looked inside, the couch was there again. Only now the leather had dark stains spreading across it like ink and water. But it wasn't just the stains. Something inside it moved. A low, hollow sound came from the couch, like a muffled scream. I was done. I grabbed a can of gasoline and poured it over the couch, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the bottle. I was so close to ending this. I just needed to burn it and then it would be gone. But then something terrible happened. A cold, dark hand shot up from the stain, grabbing my wrist. I screamed, tried to pull away, but the grip was iron. Something in the darkness pulled me closer to the couch, and then I saw him. John. He was there, emerging from the shadows, his face twisted with regret. "I tried to warn you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's too late now." Before I could ask him what he meant, the shadow surged, solidifying into something monstrous. It flung me aside, sending me crashing into a pile of scrap metal. As I struggled to get to my feet, I saw John being consumed, his screams swallowed by the creature's darkness. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe as the shadow turned to face me, looming over me with an eerie curiosity before vanishing into thin air. I sat there trembling, completely lost. The junkyard was quiet again, like nothing had happened. I got back into my truck, shaking, and drove home. As I passed the snow-covered streets, my eyes drifted to the passenger seat. There, on the seat, was a scrap of fabric, blackened and ashy. I picked it up, and my heart stopped when I read the words stitched into it. "We always come back." I drove home, but deep down I knew it wasn't over. Couldn't be. This is a short but scarring story nonetheless from my early childhood. I grew up in an average middle-class home in the suburbs. My sister and I were huge fans of Christmas as kids. I had to be about 6 years old when this happened, because we had just moved to our new house. This is one of my earliest memories in life that I remember vividly, just because of the gravity of it. On Christmas Eve, I would always have trouble sleeping, even as a young kid, just due to anticipation. I would stay up really late playing video games in my room on my old box TV. I'd play until I just fell asleep from exhaustion. On this particular night, I was playing a Star Wars game for the PS1, and when I had to go to the bathroom, I turned the volume down low and quietly snuck out of my room because I knew my mom would get mad if she heard me sneaking around on Christmas Eve night. I snuck to the upstairs bathroom, and when I was done, I was quietly heading back to my room when I heard the sound of the tree rustling downstairs. My first instinct was to think, "Santa." I started tiptoeing down the stairs until I got to the bottom. The sound of the rustling pine needles was louder now. I peeked around the bottom wall of the stairway into the living room. There were no lights on except for someone holding a flashlight. I could see only the person's legs as they were bent over behind the tree. There was a black bag on the floor, and then this random adult man came out from behind the tree and looked at me. He looked at me and put his pointer finger up to his mouth, making a shushing motion with his lips. He whispered, "Yes, I'm Santa." I was old enough and smart enough to know that wasn't what the Santa I grew up knowing looked like. I started screaming for my mom and dad as loud as I could. I remember the man started freaking out, deciding whether or not to take the bag he filled with our gifts. He ended up running away toward the front door. I don't remember if he had to unlock it or if it was already unlocked. I just remember him leaving through the front door, and seconds later, my parents running down the stairs. I'm sure I screamed, "There's a man in here," and them seeing the black bag on the floor filled with our would-be stolen gifts proved that. Here's where my memory started getting fuzzy, so I had to ask my parents what happened next. My dad told me he went outside in his slippers and ran all over the place, ready to kill someone. Half the ornaments on the tree were taken off and put in the bag. What kind of sick, evil person steals people's sentimental Christmas ornaments? According to my dad, the method in which the man broke in was the back door, which it appeared he yanked open with a crowbar due to the chipped wood. A house a few blocks away had also fallen victim to this, and it was on the news. It was most definitely the same guy. I don't remember much from when I was 6, but this is a memory that most of it still sticks in my brain like it was only a few years ago. About 4 years ago, when I was 8 months pregnant, something weird happened. My belly was big and noticeable because I was almost ready to have my baby. I went to the local mall to do some Christmas shopping. It was around 9 o'clock at night when I finished. After I got my shopping done, I walked out of the mall to head to my truck. At this mall, there's a road that goes around the building, and the parking lot is on the other side of the road. So, to get to the parking lot, you have to cross the road. As I was leaving the store, I saw a man standing in the middle of the road. He looked right at me and made eye contact. I quickly looked away and kept walking. At the same time, two other men walked past him to go into the mall. He didn't look at them or say anything to them. He just kept his eyes on me. I noticed he started walking toward me. "Excuse me? Can you help me?" he asked. Being from the South, I was raised to be polite, so I couldn't ignore him. I asked, "What do you need?" He looked around and said, "Can you help me start my car? I think my battery is very low." Now, I may be polite, but I'm not foolish. If his car was really having trouble, why would he ask a pregnant woman for help instead of the two men who just walked past him? That didn't make sense to me. So, at this point, I knew it was time to leave. I said, "Sorry, I can't help," and kept walking. But this time, a little faster. I could still see him from the corner of my eye, and he was following me. I had my keys out and was ready to get in my truck as soon as I reached it, but he was still following me. "You're really not going to help me? I just need a jump," he said. I replied, "Nope, sorry." I finally got to my truck, unlocked it, and got inside. By now, he was almost running toward me. I locked the doors quickly and tried to put the key in the ignition, but my hands were shaking so much that I couldn't get it to fit. He reached my truck and started banging on the window. Then, he grabbed the door handle and tried to open my door, screaming, "Just open the door." That's when I lost my cool and made a quick decision. I had taken self-defense classes before and knew I needed to act to protect myself and my baby. When he tried to open my door, my only thought was to keep us safe. I rolled down the window and said, "I'm not going to tell you again. Stop following me." Felt like time stopped in that instant. I didn't know what he would do next, but I was ready to use the self-defense skills I had learned if he came any closer. But fortunately, he didn't. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked away. Even though the danger was gone, I couldn't leave right away. I sat there, frozen and shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being in serious danger. I was terrified, not just about what could have happened, but also about how quickly I had to act to protect myself and my baby. It's not a situation I ever want to face again, but I'm glad I trusted my instincts. Two years ago, I spent Christmas with my roommate. We were both in college and were splitting rent on a small house in the suburbs outside of the campus. Neither of our families were particularly big on Christmas, and we were also kind of broke, so we stayed home for the winter break. We still did a bit of decorating and had gotten each other some cheap little gifts so we could have our own small Christmas. But other than that, we mostly planned on watching movies and maybe going to a party at night. It wasn't ideal, but it was Christmas, and we were doing the best we could. On Christmas Day, we opened up our gifts and hung out. It was a quiet, peaceful day, just the two of us in the house, surrounded by the soft glow of Christmas lights. Around 5 p.m., my roommate wanted to go to a party by the campus. I had planned on going too, but for some reason, I just felt tired, not really in the mood to go out. I encouraged him to go if he wanted to, and he took me up on the offer, heading out around 6 p.m. I sat back, ate some junk food, watched TV, and just relaxed. It was a peaceful night. But then, around 8 p.m., I started feeling restless. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to get out of the house, even though there was really no place to go. The streets were empty, and everything felt quiet, but I wanted to stretch my legs, see the holiday lights. So, I grabbed my jacket and decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood to look at the houses with Christmas lights. It was cold out, but not freezing, just chilly enough to make the air feel crisp. I wandered through the neighborhood, passing by houses decorated with bright lights, wreaths, and inflatable Santa Clauses. The usual holiday charm was in the air, and for a moment, I felt a little bit of that Christmas magic despite everything. But then, as I walked through a nearby park, I noticed something strange. The path through the park was covered in trees, far from the street and the houses, and there, sitting on a bench alone, was a man. It wasn't particularly odd at first. He seemed like someone who just wanted to be left alone, but as I passed by, he looked up at me. His eyes locked with mine, and he gave me this cold, unsettling look. It wasn't a look of anger or malice, just emptiness. His eyes were void of any emotion, and the chill that crept up my spine in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. Why was he out there? Why was he sitting alone in that spot at this hour? It was strange, but I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling. I picked up the pace as I reached the end of the path, heading back home. But all I could think about was that man. His look kept replaying in my mind over and over. There was something off about him, something wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I hurried back to the house, opened the front door, closed it behind me, and took off my shoes. Just as I was about to walk away from the door, I heard a thump, quick and sudden. My heart skipped a beat. It was a sound that shouldn't have come so quickly after I had gotten inside. I froze, my blood running cold, and leaned over to look through the peephole in the door. There he was, the man from the park, standing on the porch, staring at the door. His face was completely blank. No smile, no frown, just an empty, emotionless expression. My breath caught in my throat. What the hell was he doing here? I cracked the door open, calling out softly, "Are you okay?" He didn't respond, just stared at me. I asked again, more firmly this time, but still he didn't say a word. The silence hung in the air, suffocating. I closed the door and moved back to the peephole. The man didn't budge. He stood there for a whole minute, staring. Then he slowly walked off to the side of the door until he was out of view. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But something felt terribly wrong. I glanced over at the window. One of the curtains was open. He could see straight into my house now. My Christmas tree, the couch, maybe even me if I moved. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to go close the curtains. I stood there, my mind racing, trying to decide what to do next. And then, another thud. This time, it came from outside the window. I jumped back, my heart hammering in my chest. Through the window, I saw the man, standing outside, holding a large rock. Without warning, he slammed it against the glass, his face still blank, his eyes cold and lifeless. I felt my stomach twist in knots as I backed away from the window. What the hell was going on? Why was he doing this? In a panic, I ran to lock myself in my room. I dialed 911, hearing the man continue to hit the window with the rock. Each hit echoed through the house, and I was sure the glass was going to shatter any moment. After a few more hits, everything went quiet. For a moment, I thought he was gone, but then I heard footsteps. The man had moved to the front door. I could hear the thud of him banging on it now, as if trying to break it down. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes. But it felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard sirens. The police arrived and the man was gone. When they looked around, they found the damage. There were multiple cracks in the window, and the front door had chunks of wood smashed out of it. The police seemed to think it was just some intoxicated person, likely with no real reason to target me. Maybe he had just wandered by, not knowing who lived there, and just picked a house to mess with. But that didn't make any sense. His behavior was too deliberate, too unsettling. The way he had acted, calm, almost methodical, was insane. If he had gotten in, I don't even want to think about what would have happened. The police left without finding him, and I was left in a house full of shattered glass, heart pounding in my chest. What did he want? Why had he come to my house? I may never know. But that night, I learned that sometimes the scariest thing is not knowing what someone wants or why they are watching you in the dark.